You ever been the disappointment at your own family table? Yeah, that was me. They laughed at my cheap little church gift, not knowing the envelope in my hand was about to take their money, their reputation, and even my mom's dream house right out from under them. This isn't just a church story. It's how I turned their betrayal into quiet revenge and walked away owning everything. Watch till the end. Then you tell me who really won. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old. And this is how I turned their betrayal into my blueprint for power. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. I want you with me for this, because if you've ever felt like the disappointment at your own family table, you're going to recognize yourself in the cracks of this story. It was Christmas morning in a small Ohio town, the kind where neighbors still wave and the church bell cuts through the cold like clockwork. Our windows had that soft frost at the corners, like lace. I remember the way the coffee smelled, burnt and overbrewed, the way my mom likes it, and the way the living room felt heavy with coats, pine needles, and family tension that was just quiet enough that everyone could pretend it wasn't there. The TV was on low in the corner, some Hallmark movie recycling the same happy family in different sweaters. Wrapping paper was already scattered across the carpet, flattened in some places where people had stepped on it. My dad's old recliner sat empty like a ghost taking up space, and I sat on the edge of the couch cushion, not really in the circle, not really out of it either. I held the gift in my lap. Modest wrapping. No ribbon. Just a plain, creased fold with a sticker tag that said, "To Church." The paper was that cheap drugstore kind that wrinkles if you even look at it wrong. My thumbs kept smoothing over the corners like maybe I could iron out how small it looked, how small I felt. It wasn't meant for anyone under our tree. It was meant for the altar, the community charity table our church put out every Christmas. And yet, Mom didn't even glance at it before the scoff came out of her mouth. That? Don't bring it. It's not worth showing at church. Her voice was sharp, but low, like she didn't want to embarrass me, just remind me quietly that I already was. Her mug hovered halfway to her lips, nails perfect, lipstick perfect, judgment even more perfect. My fingers curled under the paper edges. I didn't say a word, didn't need to. My sister's smirk said plenty from across the room, that little twist at the corner of her mouth like she'd been waiting for this moment. She sipped her latte like it was some kind of victory drink. Aunt Marie leaned over her coffee mug and whispered just loud enough for the cousins to hear. Embarrassing, honestly. One of my younger cousins tried not to stare at me, eyes flicking from the gift to my face, like they were checking to see if I'd cry. No one asked what was inside. They never do. They just see the packaging, the plain wrap, the lack of flash. And that's enough to decide who I am to them. Claire, the one who never quite measures up. I nodded once. A small mechanical gesture, the kind you give to keep the peace. Even though the peace was already cracked and uneven like the driveway outside, I could feel the familiar burn rising in my chest, that mix of shame and anger that tastes like you swallowed pennies. That gift stayed in my lap like it had grown heavier in an instant. Not because of the paper or the box, but because of everything they were loading onto it without saying a word. No one offered to carry it to the car. My mom folded her cashmere scarf with surgical precision while ignoring me completely. Like if she didn't look directly at me, I might eventually disappear and make things easier for her. I carried it anyway. I stood up, smoothed my jeans, slid my arms into my old coat. My sister barely shifted her legs so I could get past. Aunt Marie lifted her feet off the floor just enough so I wouldn't trip, like that was some huge favor. The drive to the church was short, maybe 10 minutes. But when you are in a car with people who have already decided you are the family letdown, 10 minutes feels like a cold war with no words, no eye contact, just judgment thick in the air like fog on a highway. Mom had spent the morning fussing about how much she gave. 2 new jackets for the charity table. A check she kept flashing like a backstage pass, making sure everyone saw the amount even though she pretended it was private. My sister bragged about the hand-stitched ornaments she donated, explaining every detail like she was on a craft show. Even Aunt Marie dropped a designer bag at the altar like she was walking a red carpet, talking loud enough for anyone nearby to hear the brand name. I didn't care about any of that. What I brought couldn't be worn. It wouldn't fit in a box. And it sure as hell wasn't meant to impress anyone, especially not them. There is a different kind of gift, one that looks boring on the outside and changes the entire blueprint of a place when it is opened. That is the kind I was carrying. As we pulled into the church parking lot, the snow had turned into that light, annoying drizzle that ruins your hair and makes everything look gray. Families shuffled in, kids in itchy sweaters, men adjusting ties they only wore twice a year. I watched them through the windshield for a second and wondered how many of them felt as out of place with their own people as I did with mine. Inside, the sanctuary filled with warm bodies and colder glances. The air smelled like candles, old wood, and that specific winter mix of wet wool coats and cheap perfume. The candles glowed along the altar steps, casting flickers across stained glass scenes of stories everybody pretends to live by. Carols played soft from the organ loft above, the same songs I had heard every December of my life. It was beautiful. The kind of beauty you can't fake, even when the people around you are busy playing pretend. I sat quietly near the aisle because that is where you sit when you want the option to leave. I laid the still-wrapped gift on my lap, hands resting on top of it like I was guarding something fragile. Mom and my sister took the front pew with Aunt Marie, like always, their coats draped neatly over the back, their postures straight, ready for their moment. The pastor began reading names. Each donor was applauded, thanked, some even cheered. Mrs. Dalton for the toy drive, the Hendersons for the food baskets. My family sat straighter every time one of their items got mentioned. Mom adjusted her pearl earrings like she was waiting for a photo op that hadn't happened yet. Face turned slightly toward the aisle in case anyone important looked her way. My sister leaned over once and whispered to Mom, and they both smiled. I knew that smile. The one that had me on the outside of a joke I never got to hear. I traced a line on the edge of the gift with my thumb and kept my eyes on the altar so I would not have to see them. Then the deacon paused. He whispered something to the pastor, handed him a sealed envelope. Even from halfway back, my chest tightened because I recognized it instantly. The same envelope I had placed into the donation box days ago, when the church was empty and quiet and no one was watching. The same one I had packed with documents no one in my family had ever cared to ask about. Pages that represented months of late nights, client calls, spreadsheets on my laptop, and me finally deciding that if my own blood never took me seriously, I would put my work where it actually mattered. The pastor cleared his throat and looked out over the congregation with that particular weight in his eyes, the kind that makes people stop shifting and settle in. Before we continue, there's one more gift to acknowledge, one given quietly, without recognition. The room shifted. You could feel it. Even the pews seemed to breathe differently. People straightened up. Kids stopped fidgeting for a second. He opened the envelope, brow furrowing as he read, then softening into something close to awe. This envelope contained not just a monetary donation, but approval from the state for a full renovation of our children's wing, as well as funding for the next 2 years of outreach programs, including meals, after-school support, and transportation assistance. Gasps. Actual gasps. It takes a lot to make people in our town react like that. They have seen floods and layoffs and scandals, and still, this pulled a sound out of them like the air had been punched. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood up. I did not rush. I did not look around for approval. I just stepped into the aisle, one foot in front of the other, coat brushing against the wooden edges of the pews as I passed. I could feel eyes on me, feel the hush widening as I walked forward with the same envelope in my hand that I had seen in his. Somewhere behind me, I heard the soft intake of my mother's breath. My sister said my name once under her breath, like she was not sure if this was real. But I kept moving. I walked up the few steps, the old wood creaking in a way I had heard since I was a kid, and placed the envelope on the altar. My fingers lingered on it for just a second. Not for drama, for closure. The pastor opened it like he was afraid he might bend the pages. Inside were three things. The official donation receipt, printed on simple white paper with a number that would have made my family choke if they saw it on a bank statement. The outreach grant paperwork I filed and paid for myself. Lines of approval, sign-offs, and seals I had chased down through calls and emails and applications, while everyone else in that front pew was busy laughing about my little projects. The notarized letter confirming my transfer of funds to the church's community fund, the final piece that turned all that work into something solid and undeniable. He turned the last page, and then he said my name. Claire Elizabeth Moore. Silence. Then applause. It started in the back, from people who only knew me as the quiet girl who used to stack chairs after youth group. Then it spread forward, hands coming together, a few people standing. Someone whistled once, quick and sharp, before they remembered where they were. Then more silence. Because it wasn't just a generous gift. It was the largest contribution of the morning. The kind of number that shifted how people saw this church's future. The kind of number my family never imagined my name would be attached to. I turned slowly. The lights from the candles and the stained glass blurred for a second as my eyes swept the sanctuary and landed on that front pew. I met every pair of eyes there. My mom's lips were parted, frozen mid-breath, eyes glossy not with pride, but with shock. Her hands tightened on her program until the paper bent. My sister blinked like she couldn't process the math, like she was trying to rewind the last 5 minutes in her head and see where she had missed something. Aunt Marie looked down and fiddled with her phone, scrolling for no reason, her face locked in neutral like if she didn't react, it wouldn't be real. And still, no one spoke to me. Not right away. I stepped down, moved back toward my seat at the edge of the aisle. People I only half remembered from Sunday school years ago reached out to touch my arm, to whisper thank you, to say how incredible it was, how needed, how timely. I nodded, smiled, accepted their words, but my ears were tuned to that front row, waiting for something, anything. Nothing came. I didn't need them to, because the thing they told me not to bring, the gift they said wasn't worth showing, was the very thing this church would build its next chapter on. The paperwork, the money, the strategy behind it. All of it born from the parts of me my family had spent years dismissing. They didn't even know that was only part of it. In their heads, I was still the girl with the plain wrapping, the simple tag, the unremarkable presence. In reality, I was already walking away with everything that mattered. They didn't follow me back to the pew. They didn't say a word when I sat down again, still warm with the afterglow of applause that wasn't meant for them. But I felt it. That electric tension humming off my mother's shoulder as she shifted in her seat. The way she clasped her purse tighter, like maybe she thought someone might try to take something from her. Funny, considering how much she'd taken from me without lifting a finger. I stared straight ahead, into the glow of the altar candles, while behind me the weight of generations of silent women clung to the pews like dust in the seams. I wasn't supposed to be seen. I was supposed to be quiet, neat, a helper. Someone who fills in the gaps, irons the napkins, signs the cards other people take credit for. But now, they didn't know what to do with me. And that's when I knew I'd finally taken something back. Because the moment I stopped shrinking for them was the moment they stopped knowing how to measure me. I heard my mom clear her throat once behind me, that sharp, polite sound she uses when she wants to reset a room. It didn't work this time. The room had already shifted, and it wasn't shifting back for her comfort. The choir began another carol, voices rising and filling the sanctuary. I let the sound wash over me like a shield. After the service, people came up. Members of the congregation I barely knew by name. Elderly couples with soft hands and watery eyes. Young moms balancing diaper bags and toddlers on their hips. A teenager who looked like she wanted to say something but just nodded, eyes wide, cheeks pink. They all thanked me. Not with big words or grand gestures, just warm hands on mine, teary glances, a tight squeeze of my fingers, a hand on my shoulder as someone walked past. A single woman's voice near the coffee urn. "You just saved our kids' program." She said it so simply, like it was a fact written on the wall. I didn't cry, but I did feel something loosen in my ribs, like I'd been holding my breath for 10 years and finally got to exhale. I could feel my mother's gaze on me from a distance, hot and sharp like a spotlight. She didn't come closer. She didn't smile. She just watched. I heard snippets of whispers around me. "Did you know she did all that?" "No." "Claire? Really?" "I heard she handled all the paperwork herself." They weren't cruel whispers, just surprised ones. For years, I'd been the girl who took notes in meetings, who stacked chairs after events, who stayed late to clean up when everyone else had slipped out to lunch. The helper, the background support. Now they were trying to fit largest donation and state approval into that same picture, and the frame didn't match anymore. When the crowd around me thinned, I grabbed a styrofoam cup of coffee from the folding table in the corner. It was lukewarm and bitter, but my hands were cold and I needed something to hold. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not here. Maybe not to myself. For the first time in a long time. My family didn't wait for me. When I stepped outside, they were already halfway down the front steps, heading toward the car. Their backs were turned, coats pulled tight, boots crunching on the thin layer of snow that had settled while we were inside. They looked like they couldn't get away from that building fast enough. Snow fell soft, collecting in the bend of tree limbs and on the black wool of my coat. The air hit my face and stung my cheeks, but it felt cleaner out there than it did under the weight of those stained glass windows. Mom didn't turn when she spoke. "You could have told us." Her voice floated back toward me, thin in the cold. Not a shout. Not a warm, laughing, proud thing. Just a sentence thrown over her shoulder like an accusation she didn't want to own fully. I stopped at the curb. The salt crunched under my boots, and a car door slammed somewhere down the row of parked cars. Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't grateful either. It was tight, bitter, the way someone sounds when they realize they're not in control anymore. "Would you have listened?" I asked. My voice came out steady, calmer than I felt. She finally turned. Her eyes swept over me, up and down, like she was checking for something out of place. "That's not the point," she said. "It's about respect." There it was. Her favorite word. Respect. The word she used when she really meant obedience. "No," I said, shaking my head once. "It's about presentation. You didn't respect the gift because it wasn't wrapped the way you wanted." The cold air made our breath visible between us, little clouds rising and fading. She opened her mouth and closed it. First time I'd ever seen her hesitate in public. My sister slid into the passenger seat without looking at me, ponytail swinging as she turned away. She adjusted the visor mirror and pretended to check her lipstick. Aunt Marie lit a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have around the kids, cupping her hand around the flame like this was just another winter smoke break. She drew in a long drag, held it, exhaled slow. Didn't offer me one, didn't say congratulations. They were falling apart, silently. Because what I did wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it unspooled something they couldn't wrap back up with judgment or silence. We didn't speak in the car. The drive home was dead quiet. Just the sound of tires on, salted roads, and the faint, tinny static of the radio, a version of "Oh Holy Night" that cracked on the high notes. I watched the gray sky roll by through the passenger window, the town blurring into a mix of old brick buildings, gas stations, and half-decorated yards. Plastic Santas leaned at weird angles. One inflatable snowman bowed in the wind. I stared out the window. Snowflakes stuck to the glass like little reminders. They're all different. But what no one says is that they all disappear if you don't pay attention. My reflection floated faintly over the view outside. 34 years old and still riding in the back seat like a kid. But something was different now. I wasn't sitting back there because they put me there. I was sitting back there because I was choosing my distance. When we got back, I stayed in the car a minute longer than everyone else. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. The house lights glowed warm through the front windows. I watched my mom and sister walk up the steps, watched Aunt Marie flick her cigarette into the slush and stomp it out. They went inside. The front door shut behind them with that familiar muffled thud. I looked up at the rearview mirror. My own eyes stared back at me, tired but awake in a way I hadn't seen before. And I whispered it, just to hear how it sounded. "You did good." My voice was quiet, but it echoed in that small space like I'd shouted. No one ever told me that growing up. Not once. Not when I brought home straight A's. Not when I got into the college I wanted but couldn't afford. Not when I graduated. Not when I moved out. Not when I paid for my first apartment by picking up weekend shifts no one else wanted. Good was expected. Great was ignored. Anything beyond that was dismissed as showing off. But I'd said it now, and it meant more coming from me than it ever would have from them. I finally opened the car door and stepped out. The cold air hit me again, sharper now that the adrenaline had faded. I crunched up the driveway, feeling the snow give way under my boots, and let myself in without knocking. Inside, I left my coat on. Didn't bother putting away the casserole dishes still sitting on the counter from breakfast. Half-dried eggs stuck to the sides of a baking dish. A serving spoon balanced on the edge of a bowl. Mom was on the phone, voice low, clipped. She stood by the kitchen island, one hand pressed to her hip, the other holding the phone a little too close to her mouth. "I know, we were all so surprised," she said, with that performative little laugh she saved for her friends. No, I had no idea she was doing all that. Well, of course we've always encouraged her to be involved. She was already rewriting the story in real time, positioning herself as the supportive mother, the proud matriarch blindsided by her daughter's generosity. As if she hadn't tried to stop me from bringing the envelope at all, as if she had anything to do with it. I didn't call her out. Not then. I just let the words roll past me. I went upstairs. Each step creaked in the same familiar places it always had. I pushed open the door to the room I grew up in. The wallpaper still peeled slightly in the corners, little curls of faded floral print. The posters I'd taped up as a teenager were long gone, but the faint outlines where the sun hadn't faded the paint all the way were still there. The smell of old books lingered in the closet, paper and dust and forgotten afternoons. My childhood desk still sat under the window, drawer jammed with pens that didn't work, and notebooks half filled with plans I'd never shown anyone. I sat on the bed, the mattress sagging in the same spot it always had. I unzipped my purse and pulled out the second envelope, the one she didn't know about, the one that didn't go to the church. This one had her name on it, her full name written in neat black ink, Mrs. Elizabeth Ann Moore, sealed, the flap pressed tight, edges sharp, certified mail receipt already signed for, tucked inside with the copies. I had the original documents in a folder at my apartment in the city. This was just the courtesy copy, the copy of the property reassignment from my grandmother's estate. I ran my thumb along the edge. She thought she'd secured the lake house for herself. She thought her name had stayed on the trust after Nana passed. She thought she'd outplayed everyone, like always. But she hadn't read the paperwork carefully. Nana hadn't forgotten how Mom treated people. Hadn't forgotten the way she'd talked to nurses in the hospital, cutting and impatient. Hadn't forgotten the way she'd rolled her eyes when Nana asked for help with the TV remote. Hadn't forgotten what Mom said about her in the hospital when she thought I wasn't listening. I remembered it. The hissed complaint in the hallway. I swear, if she calls me one more time just to move that stupid bed, I'm going to lose it. She's not the only one with a life. I'd stood there with styrofoam coffee in my hand, my back pressed to the cold tile wall, listening to my mother talk about her own mother like a burden she couldn't wait to set down. So Nana left it to me, not out of spite, though I'm sure that was a little satisfying to her, out of intention, out of the simple fact that when she pressed the call button, I showed up. I sat with her when the morphine made her talk in circles. I rubbed lotion into her hands when the skin got thin and papery. I changed the channel when she got tired of the news. And I hadn't said a word. Not at the funeral. I stood in black, letting my mother play grieving daughter in front of everyone. Not during probate, when the lawyer read it out, and Mom's face went sheet white for half a second before she recovered. Not when my mother bragged about how she was going to redecorate the whole place, how she was going to finally make it look decent and get rid of all that old junk that still smelled like Nana's perfume. I just waited until the ink dried, waited until the documents were processed, waited until the first property tax notice came with my name on it, waited until Christmas, because some gifts are too big to wrap, some truths are too heavy to drop in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. And some revenge doesn't need to raise its voice. It just needs the right moment, the right envelope, the right woman finally tired of being treated like cheap wrapping paper around something everyone else thinks they own. That night, while the rest of the family gathered downstairs for dessert and fake laughter, I stayed upstairs and opened the second envelope again. Not to read it. I already knew every word. I just needed to hold it, to remind myself it was real. There it was in bold print, the transfer of deed, the updated will, the full legal confirmation that the lake house, Nana's lake house, was now mine. Not Mom's, not ours. Mine. I could still see the wallpaper in Nana's kitchen when I closed my eyes. That soft yellow with tiny blue flowers, fading in the corners. I could still smell the lemon oil she used to wipe down the counters, even when her hands had started to shake. I remembered how she used to press my palm into the wood of the window frame when I was little and say, "Remember this feeling," she'd murmur. "This place will always be a safe house for you, for your spirit, no matter who tries to take your light." I never told anyone she said that, and I never told her how badly I needed to hear it. Downstairs, a burst of laughter floated up through the floorboards. A high, sharp sound, followed by my sister's voice telling some story I wasn't part of. Someone turned the TV up a little too loud. I laid back on the bed, arms folded across my chest, and stared up at the ceiling. The paint over my head was still the same off-white it had been in high school, with that one faint water stain in the corner that looked like a crooked heart if you squinted. I listened to the sound of my family laughing beneath me, that brittle, hollow kind of laughter, the kind that crumbles if you touch it too hard. They had no idea. None of them. Not that I'd inherited the house, not that I'd used the life insurance money from Nana's policy, money they didn't even know existed, to fund the church renovation. Not that I'd spent the last 6 months working with a quiet legal team, meeting on my lunch breaks, paying retainers instead of rent some months. They saw my cheap clothes, my old car, my lack of ambition, as they put it. They saw me show up alone to holidays and leave early. They saw the way I bowed out of dinners and group trips and used words like busy and broke as punchlines about my life. But they didn't see the bank statements or the contracts. They didn't see the early mornings when I was sending emails before sunrise and the late nights when I was filling out forms at my kitchen table with cold takeout sitting next to my laptop. They didn't see me. Not really. To them, I was still the girl who never quite took off. The one who had potential, but never pushed herself. I rolled onto my side and held the envelope against my chest, feeling the weight of the pages through the standard issue manila. It felt heavier than paper should feel, like it was full of every time someone had told me I was overreacting, too sensitive, not practical enough. I lay there until the laughter downstairs faded into the low hum of the dishwasher. Eventually, the house went quiet. That deep, late-night kind of quiet where you can hear the heater kick on and the pipes groan a little. I slid the envelope back into my bag, turned off the lamp, and let the dark wrap around me like a blanket. Sleep didn't come easy. My mind kept replaying the pastor saying my name, the sound of the applause, the look on my mother's face when she realized she wasn't the main character in the room anymore. But under all that noise in my head, there was a thin, steady line of calm. Tomorrow, it shifts, I thought. Tomorrow, this whole story tilts. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The light outside the window was that pale, washed-out gray that comes right before sunrise. My breath puffed out a little cloud when I sat up, the room colder than I remembered it ever being when I was a kid. I pulled on jeans, a sweater, thick socks. No makeup. Didn't bother trying to look put together for anyone. I slipped my feet into my boots, picked up the envelope with Mom's name on it, and walked quietly down the stairs. The house felt different in the early morning. Less stage, more skeleton. No TV noise, no clatter. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock in the hallway. I placed the envelope with Mom's name on it right in the center of the kitchen table, next to her coffee mug where I knew she'd find it first. Her mug was already waiting, clean, sitting in its usual spot like a placeholder for her presence. I set the envelope so it touched the rim. There, right where she couldn't pretend she didn't see it. For a second, I let my hand rest on top of it. Not in hesitation, in blessing. Then I turned away. I packed my bag in the front hall. One duffel, a couple pairs of jeans, warm clothes. The important documents folder I kept with my passport and Nana's original will. My laptop, and Nana's house keys. The key ring was old, the metal worn smooth where her thumb used to rest. The little blue plastic keychain with the faded address label still hung from it. I turned it over in my palm, feeling the notches of the key bite into my skin. I took one last look around the house. The framed family photo by the stairs, the entryway mirror where Mom always checked her lipstick before leaving, the Christmas garland strung along the banister, fake pine needles already shedding little green plastic bits onto the floor. I didn't wait for her to come downstairs. I didn't say goodbye. I just opened the front door, let the cold hit my face, and walked out while the house still smelled like pine needles and reheated cinnamon rolls. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, set my bag in the passenger seat, and closed the door with a soft, deliberate click. It was snowing again. Light but steady. The kind of snow that makes everything quiet, like the world is holding its breath. I started the car, let the engine warm for a minute, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back at the front window to see if anyone was watching. I drove with the radio off, Didn't need music. The silence was enough. As the town thinned out and the fields opened up, the landscape turned into a stretch of white and gray. Bare trees reached up like ink lines against the sky. My hands settled on the wheel, muscle memory taking over the curves and turns I'd driven 100 times with Nana in the passenger seat. Back then, she'd fill the drive with stories about when she and Papa first bought the place and how different everything felt before people hardened. Now, the only sound was the soft thrum of the engine and the whisper of the heater. By the time I pulled into the gravel drive of the lake house, the sun was just starting to rise. The sky was streaked with pale pink and blue. The lake house sat there at the end of the drive, squat and steady. The same weathered wood siding and stone chimney I'd stared at every summer of my childhood. Snow dusted the roof. Icicles hung in uneven lines from the eaves. The water was still, gray-blue and glassy, with a thin shimmer of ice at the edges. The dock jutted out into the cold, the posts capped with little piles of snow. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a second, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. This was mine now. Not borrowed time, not a weekend visit. Mine. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots. The cold air off the lake cut straight through my sweater, sharp and clean. I stood on the porch for a long time before unlocking the door. My fingers hovered over the key, the metal cold against my skin. I could almost see Nana standing there in my memory, wiping her hands on a dish towel, swinging the door open with that little half-laugh she had when she saw me. I swallowed hard, slid the key into the lock, and turned. And then I was inside. The air held that familiar mix of old wood, laundry soap, and faint perfume. Nana's quilt still draped over the back of the couch, the pattern a patchwork of fabrics I recognized from old dresses and curtains. The old cuckoo clock ticked faintly in the hallway, its carved birds frozen mid-flight. Her housecoat still hung on the hook by the stairs, sleeves empty, pockets sagging a little. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just walked from room to room like I was reintroducing myself to a part of me I'd buried. The part that knew what love without judgment felt like. The part that remembered being asked, "How are you really?" and having someone wait for the honest answer. I paused at the window over the sink. The view of the lake stretched out in front of me, wide and open and quiet. Same view as always, different girl standing in front of it. And in the silence of that morning, I finally allowed myself to feel it. Grief. For the woman who believed in me before I believed in myself. Relief. That her wishes had been honored. Gratitude. For the way she saw me when no one else did. And power. The kind of power that doesn't come from revenge, but from reclaiming something that was yours all along. I sat down at the small kitchen table and let my head rest in my hands for a minute. Later that afternoon, I got the call. Not from Mom. Not from my sister. From the lawyer. My phone buzzed on the table, the screen lighting up with his name. For a second, my stomach flipped. Some old instinct expecting bad news any time a professional number popped up. I answered anyway. "Claire," he said, his voice calm, measured. "I assume you know why I'm calling." "I'm guessing my mother called you," I said. He exhaled, a small sound of confirmation. "She opened the envelope," he said. "She's called our office 5 times in an hour, demanded to speak to someone. Anyone. She's upset." I could picture it perfectly. Her pacing the kitchen, voice sharp, insisting there had been a mistake. Her demanding meetings, explanations, loopholes. "But the papers are final," he continued. "The property was transferred according to your grandmother's will. The reassignment is recorded. It's done, Claire. She has no legal claim." The words settled over me like a blanket. Not a dramatic swell of music, just a solid, grounded truth. I thanked him, calmly, no gushing, no oversharing, just, "Thank you. I appreciate you letting me know." We hung up. Then I made tea. Nana's blend. The one with dried orange peel and clove. The tin was still in the cabinet, pushed behind a box of plain black tea. I opened it and the smell hit me, warm and spicy and familiar. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, waited for the whistle. The house was so quiet I could hear the gas catch, the low roar of the flame. When the water was ready, I poured it over the tea, watched the color bloom through the clear glass of the mug. I wrapped my hands around it, letting the heat sink into my fingers, and I sat by the window, watching the lake, hands wrapped around the warm mug. They'd spent so many years laughing at me, judging the way I showed up in the world, rolling their eyes at my choices, calling my work cute, assuming I had nothing to offer because I didn't perform the way they did. But now I didn't need their recognition, their approval, their version of my worth. I had something better. Proof. Proof that everything they dismissed was exactly what saved that church. Proof that every waste of time grant application and every silly community program I volunteered for had sharpened skills they didn't even know I had. Proof that quiet power is still power, that you don't have to yell to be heard, you just have to speak when it matters most. I took a slow sip of tea, the heat burning a little on my tongue. I wasn't planning to go back home anytime soon. Let them sit in their confusion. Let them argue with each other about what I should have done, how I should have told them, who I should have included. Because I already had the ending, and this time, it belonged to me. I didn't check my phone for 2 days. I let the calls go to voicemail. Let the texts stack up like snowdrifts, piling quietly but not worth shoveling through. The silence was healing. Like finally turning off a song that's been stuck in your head too long. The kind you've been humming under your breath without realizing it. The lake house had a way of doing that, making everything slow down, soften. Like someone reached into my chest and turned down the volume on all the noise. Even my breath started to feel like it belonged in my own body again. The first day, I moved almost on autopilot. I found clean sheets in the linen closet and made the bed in the small room that used to be mine when I was little, tucking the corners the way Nana taught me. I wiped down the kitchen counters with that same lemon oil she used, the smell punching straight through time. I opened windows for a few minutes just to let the cold air rush in and clear out the stale grief. The second day, the stillness stopped feeling empty and started feeling intentional. I lit the fireplace that second night, kneeled on the braided rug that's been in front of that hearth as long as I can remember, used the old matchbook Nana kept in the drawer labeled Cozy Stuff. She had actually written that in her curly handwriting on a strip of tape. Cozy Stuff. Tea lights, matches, extra batteries, one of those tiny sewing kits from a hotel. A junk drawer, but for comfort. The first match flared hot and bright, lighting up the inside of the stone hearth for a second. I held it to the crumpled newspaper and dry kindling, watched the papers catch, the flame crawl, then swell. The wood popped once, throwing a tiny spark that fizzled before it hit the hearth. I curled up in her recliner with a fleece throw and one of her crossword books, half finished from 3 winters ago. Her pencil was still stuck in the spiral, her handwriting looped around clues, little notes in the margins where she'd argued with the answer. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be anything. Not useful, not impressive, not agreeable, not the good daughter, or the quiet sister, or the family's built-in extra pair of hands. Just present. I listened to the fire crackle, felt the heat seep into my knees and toes, let my mind wander without dragging it back to a to-do list. It wasn't until the third day that I finally opened the voicemails. My phone sat on the table, screen dark, battery still mostly full because I hadn't touched it. I turned it over in my hand, thumb hovering over the notifications icon. Red circles, missed calls, texts, names I knew by heart and numbers I didn't recognize. I took a breath and pressed play. Mom's voice came through like a splinter. Sharp, tiny, deep. "Claire," she said, clipped, almost breathless. "I don't know what you think this proves. You went behind our backs. Your grandmother would be ashamed of how you handled this." Click. No hi. No, "Are you okay?" Just straight to shame and accusation, the way she always did when she felt cornered. I let the silence sit for a second before I tapped the next one. My sister. Her voice was tight, like she'd been crying or yelling before she called. "Seriously, Claire?" she snapped. "You're just gonna disappear after pulling a stunt like that? You made Mom look ridiculous at church. What's wrong with you?" Click. Stunt. That's what she called it. Not work, not planning, not sacrifice. A stunt. I could see her in my mind, pacing their kitchen, nails digging into the phone case, making this whole thing about embarrassment and optics, about how my choices reflected on them. Then, Aunt Marie, of all people. Her message started with a sigh. "Claire," she said, voice low, strained, like she'd just finished arguing with someone. "I told your mother not to say anything about that gift. I told her it might be something bigger. She didn't listen. But don't punish the whole family for her mouth. That house meant a lot to her too. That one stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. Because it wasn't anger. It was disappointment. And maybe a little bit of guilt." For a second, I almost called her back. Almost. I imagined what that conversation would sound like. Me explaining, again, what it felt like to be treated like an afterthought for 34 years. Her saying something like, "That's just how your mother is," as if that made it harmless. Me swallowing the same old hurt just so everyone else could feel okay. I set the phone down instead, screen facing down on the table, like I was laying a card I refused to play. Because none of them had apologized. Not for the words, not for the years of dismissal, not for the way they looked at me like I was less than, because I didn't wrap my life in a bow the way they thought I should. I walked to the small kitchen, opened the cabinet above the stove, and reached for one of the wine glasses Nana only used when we had company, even though half the time that company was just me. I poured myself a glass of wine that night. A good one of the bottles I'd been saving for something special. The label was worn from being moved from place to place through 3 apartments, 2 breakups, and a dozen almost celebrations. Turns out, reclaiming your dignity is as special as it gets. I leaned back against the counter, took a slow sip, let it warm my chest. The fire in the living room popped. The clock in the hallway ticked, and outside the wind pushed against the side of the house. The next day, I got the letter. It wasn't from family. It was from the church. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, a little more formal than the usual donation receipts. Typed on their letterhead, sealed with a gold foil sticker that caught the light when I turned it in my hands. My name handwritten on the front in careful, looping script. I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a single page, neatly typed, the church logo at the top. And at the bottom, 2 signatures in ink, one from the pastor and one from the director of community outreach. They thanked me, not just for the donation, for the way I gave it. Quietly, without seeking recognition, but with deep intention and a heart for long-term impact. Those were their exact words. Deep intention, long-term impact. Words my family had never attached to anything I did. They talked about the renovations already scheduled, about the way the grant funding would stabilize programs that had been hanging by a thread for years, about the families who would have meals, tutoring, rides, a warm place to land after school because someone believed they were worth planning for. Then I saw it. The paragraph near the bottom. The letter said they were naming the new children's reading corner after Nana, the Elizabeth Moore Story Garden. I read that line once, twice, a third time, just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. I broke down when I read that part. There wasn't a gentle, cinematic tear rolling down my cheek. It was ugly, real, shoulders shaking, breath hitching. I slid off the chair and sat on the floor, back against the cabinet, legs stretched out in front of me, holding that piece of paper like it was made of something sacred, because she'd seen me, when no one else did. Sat at this very table and listened to me talk about my ideas like they mattered. Saved clippings from my college newsletter. Kept printouts of the first grant I ever helped write saying, "This is important, even if they don't see it yet." And now, her name would live in a space full of light, books, laughter. Kids curled up on beanbags or worn-out rugs, tracing the letters of her name with their fingers without even knowing who she was. Teachers and volunteers saying, "Go pick a book from the story garden," like it was the most natural phrase in the world. She would live in legacy, not through fancy jewelry or some portrait on a wall, through a room full of stories, through the sound of kids reading out loud, stumbling over big words and trying again. I pressed the page to my chest and let myself cry until the tears ran out, and all that was left was this deep, steady ache and a strange, quiet joy. I didn't tell anyone about the letter, not Mom, not my sister, not Aunt Marie. I didn't need to. But a week later, they found out anyway. I was back at the church, quietly helping unpack a new shipment of donated books, when the pastor pulled me aside. The fellowship hall smelled like cardboard, dust, and coffee. I stood by a folding table, slicing open boxes with a box cutter, pulling out stacks of picture books and early readers. "Claire?" the pastor said gently. I looked up. He stood a few feet away, hands clasped in front of him, that concerned pastor look on his face like he knew he was about to walk into something personal. "Yeah?" I said. "Could I talk to you for a second?" he asked. I wiped my hands on my jeans out of habit, even though they were clean, and stepped around the table to where he stood. He shifted his weight, glanced toward the doorway like he was checking if anyone was listening. "Your mom stopped by this morning," he said carefully. "She saw the sign. She didn't take it well." I could picture it instantly, her walking in like she owned the place. Spotting the plaque by the reading corner, shiny, new, with Elizabeth Moore Story Garden engraved in clean black letters. Realizing the story being told here didn't center her. He looked uncomfortable, like maybe he thought he was stepping over a line by even bringing it up. I just smiled. It surprised me how easy it came. "She didn't think the gift was worth bringing," I said. He nodded slowly. Didn't say more. He didn't have to. We went back to unpacking books. No more words about it. But the air felt different. Lighter somehow. That Sunday I went back to service. Sat near the back, my usual aisle seat in the shadows. Close enough to see everything, far enough that I could leave if I needed to. I didn't bring anything. No envelope, no donation, no grand gesture. Just myself. Just watched. The kids ran up to the altar during the children's moment, laughing, some in new coats, some still blinking sleep from their eyes. One little boy's shoelaces trailed behind him. A girl clutched a stuffed animal so hard its fur was pushed flat. The deacon knelt down to their level and started talking about stories and how important they are. How stories tell us who we are and who we can become. Then he reached into a small basket and pulled out a stack of bookmarks. Simple, laminated strips, bright colors, little pictures of trees and books and stars. He handed one to each child. "Remember," he said, "you can find all kinds of adventures in the new reading corner. It's called the Elizabeth Moore Story Garden." He said her name clearly, with respect. My name wasn't on them, but I didn't need it to be. That was the point, really. This wasn't about me getting credit. It was about the roots we leave behind. Mom was there. Front row, as usual. Perfect posture, same pearl earrings, hair smoothed to perfection, every piece in place. She didn't turn around once, but I saw her hands, white-knuckled around the bulletin, tight, still. The paper crumpling just a little under the pressure of her grip. She knew. Everyone knew. And she couldn't undo it. Couldn't talk over it. Couldn't erase it. Couldn't pull me aside later and tell me I was being dramatic or ungrateful, until I doubted my own memory. The plaque was hanging in the hallway. The bookmarks were in little hands. The programs were printed. That's the thing about power when it's quiet. When it comes from intention, not spectacle. It sinks in deeper, lasts longer. And the people who tried to shame you for not making noise, they're the ones who end up silenced. By mid-January, the lake had frozen over in thick sheets, glass-like in the morning light and cloudy by dusk. The ice made this low, distant sound sometimes, a deep groan that traveled under the surface like the lake itself was shifting in its sleep. The kind of cold that makes the house creak at night, like it's remembering things it hasn't said out loud in years. I'd started sleeping better, not because the bed was softer or the air was quieter, but because I didn't feel watched anymore, not judged, not measured, not weighed against someone else's expectations every time I took a breath. And maybe that's what real safety is. Not locks on the doors, not alarm systems, just finally existing in a space where no one is waiting to pounce on your smallest mistake. I'd spend my mornings walking the perimeter of the property, boots crunching over snow that hadn't been stepped on in days. My breath would fog out in front of me, then vanish, like little ghosts dissolving into the air. The trees stood bare and black against the white, branches reaching up like ink on paper. Midwest winters have a way of holding you still, pinning you in place, making you feel the shape of everything you lost and everything you've reclaimed in the same breath. There's nowhere to rush to. No illusion of escape in busy streets or crowds. Just you, your thoughts, and the way the wind knifes through every layer you thought would keep you warm. I'd walk by the dock, look out over the frozen water and think about how many summers I'd spent here trying to be small, sitting on the edge with my knees pulled up, listening to adults complain about things that didn't matter and never once asking how I was doing. Now the whole lake was still, silent, like it was on my side for once. It was during one of those walks that I got the second letter. I'd just come back in, cheeks raw from the cold, fingers numb even inside my gloves. I stamped my boots on the mat by the door, brushed snow off my coat, and saw it sitting there on the little entry table where I'd told the mail carrier to leave things. Not from the church, not from the family. From a lawyer, hers. The envelope was crisp, official, my name printed in stark black letters. The return address was a firm from downtown, the kind that charges by the minute and sends holiday baskets to judges. I turned it over once in my hand. My stomach didn't drop. My heart didn't race. I was just tired before I even opened it. At the kitchen table, I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out the letter. My mother had retained counsel to dispute the will, to try and contest the transfer of the lake house. Of course she had. She wasn't going to win. The documents were airtight, witnessed, notarized, filed on time, every I dotted, every T crossed. Nana hadn't trusted my mother to do the right thing on a verbal promise. She'd trusted the law, trusted paper, trusted me. But that wasn't the point. It wasn't about the house. It was about control. It was about her favorite game. If she could drag me into a fight on her terms, she'd still feel bigger than me, even if she lost on paper. She couldn't stand that I had it now. The letter didn't scare me. It made me tired. Like watching someone try to push a locked door over and over when the key is in their pocket and they're too proud to use it. You don't feel threatened. You just feel exhausted for them. I stared at the letter for a long minute, then reached for my phone. I called my lawyer, who I'd hired months earlier. Jill, a sharp, calm woman from Cincinnati who didn't smile often, but never missed a detail. The kind of lawyer who wore practical boots in winter and didn't apologize for interrupting you when you started to spiral. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Claire," she said. "You got something today, didn't you?" I huffed out something like a laugh. "Yeah," I said. "Your psychic fee is gonna be double." "Forward it to me," she said. "Walk me through it." I told her the basics, the firm, the language, the accusation that I had unduly influenced my grandmother, like I'd hypnotized a woman who'd spent 80 years telling people exactly what she thought. Jill didn't even bother pretending to be impressed. "You're fine," she said. "She's flailing. Let her file." "So we just wait?" I asked, tracing the edge of the letter with my finger. "We respond," Jill said. "Calmly, legally, professionally. We attach the documents we already have. We point out the timeline. We let the court see your grandmother's history and capacity." She paused. "You don't have to fight, Claire," she said. "You already won." That stuck with me. You don't have to fight when you already won. I hung up feeling something I wasn't used to feeling in situations like this. Not panic, not despair, control, not over my mother, over myself, over my reactions. But Mom didn't stop. Of course she didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, she sent more messages. Some formal, through her lawyer. Letters full of rigid phrases and cold accusations, printed on heavy paper like the weight would make the words truer. Some petty, through my sister. Text screenshots of messages I needed to see, comments like, "She says you're being cruel," and "Just talk to her, Claire, this is ridiculous." Some manipulative, directly from her number. Text messages that opened with, "After all I've done for you," and "I never thought my own daughter would steal from her family." She was unraveling. Because the more I refused to engage, the more she realized I'd stepped out of her script. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't defending. I wasn't typing out paragraphs at midnight trying to explain myself to people who weren't listening in the first place. I'd see her name flash on my screen and feel nothing. No need to pick up. No guilt about letting it ring. I was living. Quietly. Freely. In a house she thought she'd get to control. Until she didn't. I cooked dinner for one and ate it at the table without rushing. I stacked firewood and learned the exact sound the logs made when they were dry enough to burn well. I started a list in a notebook of small projects I wanted to do around the lake house in the spring. Not renovations to impress anyone. Repairs that would honor the place. Every time my phone buzzed with another attempt to drag me back into the chaos, I turned it face down and went back to whatever I was doing. It all came to a head the night she showed up at the lake house. No warning, no text, just headlights cutting through the fog that had rolled in over the frozen lake. I saw the glow through the front window first, 2 pale beams moving slowly up the drive, then stopping. The sound of an engine idling, then shutting off. A minute later, a knock on the door. Not frantic, but firm. 3 knocks. Evenly spaced. Like she'd rehearsed it. I stood there for a second, hand hovering over the knob, feeling my heart pick up and then steady itself. I opened it. The cold rushed in first, sliding past her shoulders and into the warm air behind me. She was bundled in her usual camel coat, the expensive one she pulled out for holidays and important events. A knit scarf wrapped around her neck. Gloves. Boots she'd never worn in snow before, the leather too smooth, the soles too clean. Behind her, the wind pushed snow into her footprints faster than she could make them. The driveway disappeared a little more with each gust. Her eyes flicked past me, over my shoulder, into the house, taking inventory. Firelight, the lamp in the corner, my mug on the side table, my life, without her, fingerprints on it. "You think you've made some kind of point," she said. Her voice didn't crack. I'll give her that. But it was tighter than usual, smaller. "No," I said, keeping my voice quiet, steady. "I just stopped apologizing for existing." She flinched. Not visibly, not to anyone else, but I saw it. The way her jaw clenched for half a second. The way her hand on her purse strap tightened. She wasn't used to me saying things like that. She was used to me swallowing them. "You humiliated me," she said. "At church. In front of everyone." There it was. The real wound. Not the house. Not Nana's wishes. Her image. "No," I said. "You did that when you said my gift wasn't worth bringing." The words hung between us like fog. Her eyes flashed, then cooled. She looked past me again, into the warmth of the house, the flicker of firelight inside, the pictures on the mantel, the quilt on the back of the couch, all the pieces of a life she thought would default to her. "This house," she said, her voice softening in a way that might have sounded vulnerable to anyone who didn't know her. "This house was mine too." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You just thought it would be." She took a shaky breath. Her eyelashes fluttered once, slow. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. And for a second, just one, I thought she might say something real. Might own something. Might let the pride drop long enough to let truth in. I thought maybe she'd say, "I was wrong," or "I hurt you," or even just, "I don't know how to fix this." But instead, "You've always been dramatic," she said. There it was, her old faithful. The label she'd used my whole life to dismiss anything that made her uncomfortable. I nodded. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. "Good night," I said. No explanation, no counter-argument, no last plea for her to understand me. I stepped back, and I closed the door. The latch clicked into place with a soft, solid sound that felt louder than any shouting match we could have had. I locked it. Not out of fear, out of finality. I stood there for a moment, hand still on the deadbolt, feeling the cool metal under my palm. Then I moved to the side window and gently pulled the curtain back with 2 fingers. I watched her through the narrow gap as she stood there another few seconds. Lost, stiff, unsure what to do when the script no longer worked. No one was watching her perform. No audience to play to. Just the dark, the snow, and a door that didn't swing open when she pushed. Then she turned and walked back into the night. Her figure grew smaller with each step, swallowed by the gray and white of the driveway. The wind picked up, and the snow swallowed her footsteps whole. By the time her taillights disappeared at the end of the road, there was no trace she'd been there at all, except inside me, where, for the first time, her leaving didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. She didn't come back. Not the next day, not the next week. The silence settled like a final snowfall, soft and heavy, covering everything that used to sting. No more calls from unknown numbers that I knew were her. No more long, dramatic texts forwarded from my sister. No more legal threats after Jill sent our last clean, unshakable response. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I kept living. Days started to stretch out in a different way. Not empty, not lonely, just mine. I'd wake up to the pale winter light leaking around the curtains, the house cold enough that you could see your breath if you talked before you cranked the heat. I'd make coffee in Nana's old machine, the one that rattled a little but still worked, and stand by the window while it dripped, watching ice fog roll off the lake. I learned the rhythm of this place again, the way the floorboards complained in the hallway, the way the fridge hummed a little louder at night, the way the wind pitched itself against the east side of the house when a storm was coming. The church opened the new children's wing on a Sunday morning in late February. The cold had that sharp, clean bite to it, but the sun was finally starting to feel a little higher in the sky, like it was thinking about being kind again. I pulled on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, tucked my hair into a beanie that didn't match anything, and drove into town with the radio low. I stood in the back, quiet as ever, while the pastor held the ribbon and thanked the anonymous donor whose quiet generosity had changed the future of dozens of local kids. The sanctuary looked different that morning, brighter, alive. Parents lined both sides of the aisle, cameras out, smiles soft and real this time. Kids bounced in place, whispering, tugging on sleeves. They didn't say my name, but they didn't need to. I watched as the pastor counted down with the kids. 3, 2, 1. The scissors cut through the ribbon with a sharp snip that echoed more than it should have. The crowd clapped. The kids surged forward, a blur of winter coats and mismatched gloves, funneled down the hall toward the new wing. I followed slowly, staying behind the pack. The new children's wing smelled like fresh paint and new carpet and the faint plastic scent of things that hadn't been broken in yet. Light poured in from the big windows they'd put in at kid height, so you could see the snow outside while you sat on the floor. And the reading corner. That stopped me for a second. Bright rugs in wild patterns, low shelves full of books with glossy covers, small chairs and beanbags pulled into little clusters like they were already mid-conversation. The plaque with Nana's name sat on the wall just above eye level for an adult, right where you'd see it if you were standing in the doorway. The Elizabeth Moore Story Garden. I traced the name with my eyes. Elizabeth. Her name. Not mine. And that felt exactly right. The moment the kids ran in, laughing, some already barefoot on the reading rugs, clutching their new books like they'd just won the lottery, I felt it again. That slow, steady warmth in my chest. Not pride, not revenge, just peace. One little girl in pigtails flopped onto a beanbag and hugged a book to her chest without even opening it. A boy in a too big hand-me-down coat went straight to the shelf and started scanning the spines, lips moving as he sounded out the titles. Two brothers started arguing quietly over who got to sit closest to the window. I stood there, leaning against the door frame, letting the noise wash over me. Little voices, little feet, little hands reaching for stories in a corner of the world that hadn't existed a few months ago. For once, nothing in me wanted to shrink. I didn't want to step out of the way. I didn't want to make myself small so someone else could feel big. I just wanted to enjoy the view. I walked home that afternoon under a sky full of gray-blue clouds. The wind had calmed. The air smelled faintly like wet earth instead of just ice. Snow had started to melt. Tiny rivers trickled down the sidewalk edges, running around piles of dirty slush and cigarette butts and bits of gravel. The whole town looked like it was exhaling, loosening its shoulders after holding tension too long. I passed the pharmacy where I used to pick up Nana's prescriptions, the diner where my mother loved to be seen, the gas station where everyone knew everyone's business. I knew people were talking. They always did. But now, for once, their opinions felt like background noise instead of a verdict. Back at the lake house, I kicked my boots off by the door and hung my coat on the hook where her housecoat used to hang. The house greeted me with its usual soft pops and sighs, the kind of welcome you only get from wood and time. I opened the drawer under Nana's old phone table. The table still held her rotary phone, disconnected years ago but too sentimental to toss. The drawer stuck a little, like always, and then gave. Inside was the letter I'd written months earlier. It wasn't for anyone else, just me. I'd written it on a night when things still felt shaky, when I was waiting on the final confirmations, the transfers, the approvals. When my mother's voice still had the power to make me question everything. A list, really, of all the things I had once believed about myself because of how they treated me. You're not smart enough. You're too quiet. You don't know what you're doing. You're difficult. You're too emotional. You're ungrateful. You'll never be more than support for someone else's life. I stood in the middle of the living room, letter in my hand, the fire low in the fireplace. I read each line, and with every sentence, I could see the moment it had been planted. A parent-teacher conference where my mother called my straight A's easy stuff and told the teacher I was lazy at home. A college application she refused to read because she didn't have time for fantasies. The first job I took that paid less than my sister's, and the way they turned that into proof that she was the successful one. The way every good thing I did was either minimized or claimed as a reflection of them. And every mistake was entirely mine. I'd written those words down to drag them out into the light. Now it was time to let them go. I knelt by the fireplace, pulled a match from the same little cozy stuff drawer, struck it against the side of the box. The flame flared, small but eager. I held it to the bottom corner of the page. For a second, nothing happened. Then the paper darkened, curled, caught. I watched that paper curl, watched smoke rise in slow spirals toward the fireplace chimney, edges blackening, words disappearing. You're not smart enough. Gone. You're too quiet. Gone. You don't know what you're doing. Gone. You'll never be more than support for someone else's life. Gone. That was the final burn. Not the church donation, not the legal win. This. Letting go of the script they had handed me and deciding they didn't get to narrate my life anymore. After that, I let go of needing them to understand. Let go of the version of my life where my mother woke up one day, texted me a real apology, and suddenly became the woman I needed her to be when I was 12. Let go of the fantasy where holidays were soft and safe, and we all sat around a table actually listening to each other. Let go of trying to earn love that came with conditions and expiration dates. The kind of love that sounded a lot like, "We'll be proud of you when..." A few days later, I got one last thing in the mail. A small envelope. No return address. No fancy firm logo. Just my name written in a neat, careful hand I didn't recognize. I stood in the kitchen, coat still on, snow melting off my boots, and opened it right there. Inside, a photo. It took me a second to recognize myself. It was me at the altar on Christmas morning. Placing the envelope. Backlit by candlelight, my profile blurred slightly, but you could still see the curve of my mouth. Half smile, half release. The angle was from the side aisle. Whoever took it hadn't been trying to stage anything. They'd just caught it. My hand extended. The envelope halfway between my fingers and the altar. The congregation blurred behind me. No note, no signature, just the image. I turned it over, half expecting a message. Nothing. Blank. Maybe someone at church sent it. Maybe it was the pastor. Maybe it was one of the teens who hung around afterward. Someone who understood what it feels like to be small until you decide not to be. Maybe it was a quiet witness. Someone who saw me when I wasn't performing. Someone who thought, this moment matters, even if nobody says her name out loud. Maybe it was someone reminding me, gently, that sometimes being seen doesn't require being loud. Not everyone who witnesses your turning point is going to tag you in it. Some people just hold it with you. I stood there for a long minute, the photo in my hand, the heater kicking on behind me. Then I got up, walked down the hall, and opened the small closet where Nana kept her picture frames. There was an empty wooden frame near the back, simple and worn at the corners, glass still intact. I cleaned it off with the edge of my sleeve, slid the photo in, and snapped it closed. I hung it in the hallway by the front door, right at eye level, so that every time I walk outside, I remember what I'm walking into. Not just the cold, not another day of trying to survive somebody else's criticism, not another performance of good daughter or quiet supporter, but my own life, my own voice, my own damn story. A story where I stopped begging for a seat at their table and built my own space instead. Where my worth wasn't up for debate at every family gathering, where too much and not enough stopped being the rulers I measured myself against. Sometimes, when I grab my keys and head out, I catch my reflection in the frame's glass. Behind it, that frozen image of me at the altar, caught mid-choice. In front of it, the woman who walked away. They're both me, but one of them still thought she had to prove she deserved to exist. The other one knows better. Every so often, word still drifts in from town. My sister mentioning in a passing text that Mom doesn't like to talk about the lake house. A mutual acquaintance saying they heard my grandmother's name at church and thought of me. The occasional, carefully neutral holiday card with my mother's signature small and tight at the bottom. We're not fixed. We're not close. We're distant. And for the first time in my life, that distance doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like a boundary. Because here's the thing. They can keep their version of the story if they want. They can tell people I was ungrateful. They can say I overreacted. They can call me dramatic until the word wears thin. But I know the truth. I know what Nana put in writing. I know what those kids gained from that renovated wing. I know what it cost me to walk away and what it would have cost me to stay. And most importantly, I know who I am when no one is grading me. I stand at that doorway now, keys in one hand, looking at that framed photo. And I hear the echo of that day, not from the pews, not from the pastor, but from my own chest. They laughed when I walked out. They didn't know I was walking away with everything that mattered anyway. My integrity, my peace, my future. My name attached to something that will outlive every petty comment they ever made about me. So, if you ever find yourself sitting at a table where your presence is treated like an inconvenience, where your gifts are dismissed because they don't come in the packaging people expect, remember this. You're allowed to get up. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to build a life in a place they never thought you'd own. And when they laugh as you leave, let them. They have no idea what you're taking with you. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.